Today we're going to talk about a technique for going back and forth between two colors of yarn. So we're going to change colors where you don't get any of the ugly little bumps that you normally see when you change colors. Typically, if you're doing purl stitches, you'll see these little bumps when you change colors. If you're doing a ribbing, which is what I'm doing here, I'm doing a ribbing, one by one ribbing, you'll usually see those ugly purl bumps on both sides. So this technique I'm going to show you is how to get rid of the little ugly bumps when you're ribbing and you're changing colors. I'll show you an example of what I'm talking about. Here's a project I finished. This is a project that is knit 3, purl 3, knit 3, purl 3. And if you look right down here where the very first row, I forgot to do it. The rest of the thing I remembered. But this very first row, when I added the second color, I forgot. And I knit 3, purl 3 with the new color. And you can see this very first row, you can see on all the purl stitches, you can see those ugly bumps where the old yarn and the new yarn take over each other. I'm going to zoom in so you can really see this. So you can see when I started adding the green, that very first row, you can see that weird, ugly bumps. Then I remembered this technique, and then for all the rest of the rows, I remembered how to do it, and I never had that problem again. You can see here on the bottom of the purl rows, you don't see any ugly bumps. As we go up on any of the purl rows, you don't see those ugly bumps. So I'm going to show you the little trick to that and how to prevent the ugly bumps from showing up when you're using ribbing and you're changing colors. So I'm working on a sweater where obviously I'm changing colors back and forth between this gold color and this cream color, and I finished the amount of rows I need for the gold, and I'm getting ready to tie on my new yarn to start using the new color. And I'm starting right here on an edge where there is ribbing. So this ribbing is a knit 1 purl 1, and we're going to do this little trick. So I'm going to just get on like I'm getting ready to knit my first row with the new color. I've got my loop ready for my first stitch. I'm not going to tie a knot in my work just yet. I typically wait until I'm about 10 rows past where I would have tied a knot, and then I go back and tie a knot. It seems to work better. So for this particular pattern, my first 2 stitches are supposed to be a slip stitch and a purl stitch. A slip stitch and a purl stitch. So I'm going to slip the first stitch like I normally do, go into the stitch, pull it all around purlwise. Then I'm going to take my yarn to the back, and now I'm going to start using my new color. And typically, because my next stitch should be a purl, typically you would purl that stitch. But for what I'm doing, I'm going to knit it instead. So I'm just bringing my yarn through. Then my next stitch is a knit. So I'm going to knit it. I'm going to hold in my hand here the 2 tails. I'm going to hold those tails over here in my hand just to get them out of the way. So I'm going to zoom in here. I'm just going to use just the cream color, and the next stitch is a knit, so I'm going to knit it. The next stitch is supposed to be a purl. Here's the trick. Instead of doing a knit 1 purl 1 across this section where the ribbing is, I want to disguise those ugly bumps, so what I'm going to do is just knit. I know it seems weird because you want to maintain your ribbing, but you just knit every stitch. So for this one little section, I'm changing the color and I'm knitting across all the ribbing stitches so that I have no purl bumps. I don't have any of the ugly purl bumps. I only have a nice knitted row. So I'm going to go to the marker, which is where it tells me to go ahead and change into my texture stitch for this particular sweater. So we're going to get here to the marker. Slip the marker. And then we're just going to go back here and look. So the only thing the only thing I have to worry about is this last stitch, because it's still yellow. But the rest of them are now the cream color, and I can continue with the cream color and go ahead and work my textured stitches. And then when I come back and I'm on the back side, when I get to this ribbing, I'm going to go back to the knit one, purl one. So I'm going to go ahead and knit to the end and come back, and I'll show you. But you will knit where there was a knit stitch and purl where there's supposed to be a purl in those inside ridges. And then by doing that, as you can see down here where I've done it before, you can see that it leaves a nice crisp edge. If I stretch it apart, you don't see any ugly purl bumps where the color change happens. You can on the back side, you can still see it, but you can't on the front side. That's how you do it. It's as simple as just knitting across and not worrying about the purl stitches for this first row of ribbing. Just knit across. I'm going to go ahead and go to the end and back and show you this last little bit. Okay, I've gone ahead and finished going to the end of the row and then came back on the purl side of the work. And I'm now back to the ribbing area where we just knitted across, and now I need to get back to the ribbing. So I kind of read my knitting. I look to the row below what I just did so that I can tell where my knits need to be and where my purls need to be. So let me flip this marker over. Let me zoom in the camera so you can see. And you can see all my little purl bumps because I knitted on this row, on this side. So I need to pick up the ribbing. So I look to see these rows, these columns of V's are. Those are my knit stitches, these rows of V's. So I need to find a row of V's and then figure out where to start purling and where to start knitting. So it's a little hard to tell sometimes on this first couple of stitches. So I go back a couple of stitches and I look and I pull one stitch out and I see a row of V's and it comes up and matches with this stitch. So I know this stitch needs to be a knit. So the next one next to it needs to be a purl, knit, purl, knit. So this very first stitch, I need to knit it. So I kind of reverse engineer the thing. So now I'm just going to do knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. And every couple of stitches I do double check to make sure that I am doing it right. So I'm getting ready to do a knit stitch. I look to see if there is a row of knits ready, which it looks like there is. So I can go ahead and knit it, purl it, knit it, purl. And again, I'm just going to double check to make sure I'm still right. There's a column of the V's, so that next stitch needs to be knit. Purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. I'm going to just double check. That's a row of V's coming up. So my next stitch is a knit, purl, knit, purl. And now you would continue doing the ribbing, knit, purl, but on this particular pattern I can't end with a knit and a purl. I have to end it the way the pattern calls for. So on this particular pattern I have to knit this last stitch and then I knit the very last stitch through the back loop. That's just because of the pattern that I'm following. That's not what you'll do if you're continuing to do your ribbing. You just continue doing your knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl all the way to the end. I just had to end that differently. So that's how I do this little sneaky trick here. It's really a little knitting hack. So now I have my color change, and I've made it invisible. You cannot see, even if you hold out the see the purl bumps in between the rows, you still cannot see any ugly stitches, because knitting all the way across camouflages that. And by going ahead and starting the knit, purl on the second row back, it doesn't let the fabric have time to stretch out like it would on stockinette. So it still maintains that stretchy knit one, purl one fabric, because I only skipped one little row with all knits. And then we went right back to knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. So that's the little hack. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it helps with your knitting. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I appreciate you watching, and thanks for being here. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you liked the video. We'll see you next time. Bye.